Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pittsburgh Sports Memories. On this podcast, we deep dive into a different topic every week regarding some kind of event or moment in Pittsburgh sports lore. And we discuss it and we remember some of the good times, some of the bad times as two lifelong Pittsburgh sports fans. This episode, we're going to go back to the year 2013 and talk about a very interesting season for the Pittsburgh Pirates and a pitcher named Johnny Cueto and a night that he will probably like to forget.
Cueto. There, you had to get one in, right? So baseball in Pittsburgh. Wow, there have been 5 World Series, but as of 2013, the Pirates were in the midst of a 20-year losing streak going into 2013. So the Pirate fans had to endure lots of losing and a lot of ineptitude, which on a little podcast we'll probably do a whole podcast on just that 20 years of horrible sports baseball. I mean, they're historically one of the worst professional sports franchise up there with people like the Bengals, the Clippers, and the Philadelphia Phillies, which is not good company.
Well, it's a North American sports record, I believe, for the major sports.
Yeah.
No one had ever had 20 losing seasons in a row. And like you said, it wasn't just 20 losing seasons. It was 20 losing seasons fraught with just horrific decisions and terrible
And they
moments.
changed owners in the middle. McClatchy left and they got Nutting. And it didn't seem to make a bit of difference. They would change general managers and regular, baseball managers. And so finally, in 2007, the Pirates hire a guy named Neil Huntington, and he's from the Cleveland Indians. And so Neil Huntington's kind of like one of these more like what was coming into vogue in baseball then was the analytics, And Billy Beane, a guy in Oakland, had figured out that nobody in baseball was paying money for guys that walked. And that's the on-base percentage, the sexy number that everybody likes. All that does is your batting average if you included walks. Right. Well, nobody in baseball cared about walks. So Billy Beane figured out if you could go get a guy that walked a lot, you would only need one guy that maybe hit a single and double, you could still score runs. So that's how Oakland did. So the Pirates hire this guy, and he's kind of looking for loopholes like that. These small market teams, the problem in baseball, it's still a problem, is the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Rangers have all these big regional TV contracts that they don't negotiate. Like football, it's all in one pot and it's dispensed to each team. The Yankees keep all, I think it's $1 billion TV contract for themselves. So that means they have an extra $1 billion to spend on salary than the Pirates could ever have. So a lot of these small market teams just can't sign the free agents the way that the Yankees can. So what the Pirates did, in the way the baseball drafts is, it's not like football where you're drafting guys have been 3 years in playing more like semi-pro ball, which is really college, for 3 years. You're drafting 18-year-olds. You're drafting people right out of high school, and that's a really not significant way. It's very that a lot of those guys don't work out. But what the Pirates figured out is if you paid, they had a slot. It's like a rookie pay scale. And they figured if you overpaid some of these guys early on, that you could keep them longer and postpone their free agency. And therefore you kind of cheat the system. And plus it was the added benefit was now the Yankees had to pay all that extra money on the back end when they wanted to sign a free agent, which would go into the luxury tax and come back to you. So it was a great little loophole for the small market teams to kind of stick it to the big market teams. And I think that the players' union didn't like it because I don't think they thought their players were getting as much as they should up front. So anywho, that's in 2008, the Pirates start to implement this strategy, and they start to sign players such as Andrew McCutchen. They signed him the year before, Neil Walker, and Pedro Alvarez, and they draft some guy named Garrett Cole we all might have heard of. And he's a rookie, and he's a pitcher. Now, and finally, 3 years later, in 2011, they hire Clint Hurdle as manager, and he's kind of the last piece to this puzzle of core for the Pirates.
And Hurdle, I think, had managed Colorado to a World Series.
Yes, and he had some success, and that was just another small market team. So,
Right.
so in 2011, 2012, I remember going to games, and I always called them the Little League lineup because they literally had McCutchen and Walker and 7 other guys that couldn't hit. So the whole point, you would just get one guy that would walk at the lead off, and then try and get Walker and McCutchen as many at bats as you could. Everybody else walk. Well, try and get them. So that was kind of their lineup there for those 2 years. And in those 2 years, they had success, especially early in the season, and they were either in first place or a game back. But then late in the season, both years, they fell apart. One time was in a game in Atlanta that went 16 innings. They kind of got probably one of the main reasons that brought instant replay to baseball was Jerry Meals called a guy safe when he was clearly out.
Yeah.
Just because I think Jerry Meals, it was 16 and he was going home. It's I'm going home. So
Yeah, not to be a homer, but that's probably the worst call I've ever seen in a sporting event.
it was ugly, yeah. And then the year later, they fell apart and lost the whole. But they still had continued the losing season. They'd done so badly in August and September, they'd still continued their losing streak. So we come forward to 2013.
Well, hang on. Going back to 2012, like that year specifically, they were 16 games over 500. 16 over 500.
Yeah, and they still
in
fell
August.
apart.
In August.
Yeah.
It's actually the greatest collapse in the history of Major League Baseball. What they fell to.
Even bigger than the Phillies in the 60s. Wow.
It's the greatest collapse in the history of Major League Baseball. Them being 16 games over 500 in August and finishing the season under 500.
Boy, Pennsylvania professional baseball really sucks.
It
Between
does.
us and the Phillies, it's because the Phillies blew like something like then they with a 5-game lead with 4 to play or something under Gene Maw.
Yeah, not a good history for either of those franchises.
Yeah.
But that was sort of unbelievable because it seemed like, there was years during that 20 year.
Well, they were
streak
done
where-
in June or July.
Yeah,
By
but
the
they-
time Steeler training camp rolled around at the end of July, it was like, okay, moving on.
Almost always. There
Yeah.
were a few years where they'd get hot in like June and people get this false sense of hope. But I think that year where they were 16 games over in August, you're like, okay, this is the end of the streak, and don't know if we're going to make the postseason, but this is definitely the end of the losing seasons. And for them to finish under 500, you just at that point you thought, okay, this is never going to happen. This streak is going to go on for 40 years, 50 years. Like this is going to be like our grandkids and being like, yeah, this started back when I was a young boy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing that those last 2 years, they probably really should have broken the streak in 2011 rather than 2012. But I mean, I don't know if it was just bad luck or maybe a lot of people blame Clint Hurdle for that.
Yeah, both of those seasons were collapses, like you
Yeah.
said. Regardless of however many games over, but both of those seasons were good seasons until we got to August.
Yeah.
So you're right, they couldn't finish, and that was certainly a concern going into that 2013 season.
Well, yeah. Now in the offseason, they sign a catcher and free agent Russell Martin, which is kind of out of character for them because they actually spent some money. And they signed a pitcher named Francisco Liriano, who I very much like. Is a very good player. But Liriano had a weird injury. He was like playing with his kids, and he broke his non-pitching arm in the offseason. And the Pirates actually made him go get like another physical, and he lost $11 million because of that. Now, I don't know if that's just Liriano's story, if he really broke it some other way, because like you always hear like these weird, like Sammy Sosa said he one time hurt his back while eating a chip. It's not really true. They probably were doing something else that they shouldn't have been. But yeah, that was kind of like a weird thing. Like people weren't too sure about Liriano because of that whole incident. And then later in the season, they trade for a rental player, which actually too they had Justin Morneau too, but he didn't do much. But they had the guy Marlon Byrd, who ended up being like a really key player in this game. So yeah, like I said, finally after being in the thick of it for the 3rd season in a row, they ended their streak on September 9th against the Texas Rangers, and I think they had actually lost 3 or 4 games going into that to finally break it. Yeah. And it was like on a relay at home plate. Like it was a close game. But they finally, and the curse is finally kind of over. It's like, okay, they're going to have a winning season or non-losing. Was that the winning or the non-losing? That might just been.
I think it's when they got to 82.
Yeah, okay.
When they got to 82. And I thought when that happened, I just thought, I can't believe I'm actually alive to see this. Like, and like you said, they got to a point where like they were one game away. Like they would have had to lose.
And then they lost like 3 or 4 in a row.
They would have to lose like their last 25 games or something ridiculous for it not to happen. And I really thought it was a possibility. I'm like, this could happen because it is such a curse. And like those baseball curses, Babe Ruth and the Billy Goat and all that. I mean, those things sometimes have done weird things in baseball. And I just thought, I just couldn't believe we actually saw that streak end. I was flabbergasted. Not only did the streak end, but they're also fighting for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and what now they're in this division. It used to be there were only 2 divisions, or back in the old days there was just 1.
There were 3 at this point, but
there was 3 way back when it was just like that in the '60s. It was just 1, I think.
Yeah, so
you would win the pennant and go to the World Series.
Right. So
and then in the '90s they went to kind of 2.
Yes.
And then now they have 3.
And I think
the Central was always small market teams.
Were the Astros, except for the Cubs, but were the Astros in the division at this point, or had they been moved to the
I think
American
they were
League?
in the West, weren't they? Or
they were in the Central with the Pirates,
Right,
but
so
then
then-
at one point they moved them to the American League, and I can't remember
Right.
if this was. The Astros stunk back then, so it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
But
But it was all like small market teams, like for the longest. Like St. Louis always kind of won the division because St. Louis was the only team that's competent.
Right.
And they have a pretty decent fan base. But Chicago's like always a total disaster. Like, and there's a lot of reasons. Like a lot of people say that's because they play in Wrigley and they don't play enough night games. Like you ever heard that one? Like, yeah, because they play so many day games because they don't like to turn the lights on that hurts the Cubs somehow. But I mean, just the Cubs are almost as pathetic as the Pirates. Although the Phillies might be more pathetic. And then who else is in that division? Cincinnati was always kind of good.
We'll talk about later.
Yeah, but in that season, normally if you went 500 in our division, you would make the playoffs. Well, that year, like all 3 of those teams were really good. Like they all had winning records and all ended up making the playoffs.
So St. Louis won the division,
and then Pittsburgh and Cincinnati ended up playing for like second place. And there was a series in Cincinnati at the end of that, a 3-game series where the Pirates had to win that series to get a home game against the Reds, and they won. They swept the Reds. Boy, I'm stumbling over my words. Swept the Reds. And that's what sets up now the wild card game at PNC Park. It's a 1 game. Now the baseball, I guess the small market teams had complained enough, just not being able, especially a team like Toronto where you're never going to compete with the Red Sox and Yankees. So I think they kind of threw the small market teams a bone there, and they added an extra round of playoffs. And plus TV likes it.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So when they expanded to the 3 divisions in the '90s, it was like you said back in the Jim Leyland era when it was 2 divisions, it was East and West, and those 2 teams would play in the NLCS.
And you would go to the World Series.
But in the winter, that would go to the World Series, and like you said, going back even before that, it was just whoever had the best record in the league.
Yeah, you could have there were teams like if you look back in the '60s, there teams that won like almost 100 games, and we're like, yep, good season. Let's go next year, boys.
Right. And I think the league championship series started, I want to say, in like the late '60s, early '70s, and then in the '90s, it was that format stayed until about the mid '90s, where they went to the 3 divisions with 1 wild card. So it was your 3 division champions and 1 wild card. So 4 teams playing in a division series. It was a 5-game division series, and the winner of those 2 series would meet in the LCS.
Right.
But like you said, by this point, like you said, people were complaining like, well, only 1 wild card team, that's not enough. We need a second wild card team. But baseball also didn't want to add another series. Like if you have 5 playoff teams, that's an uneven number. You can't have a tournament that way. So they opted for this 1-game playoff. And it was almost unfortunate for the Pirates because had this scenario happened a few years earlier, Cincinnati was the second wildcard team. Cincinnati wouldn't have even been in the mix, and the Pirates would have gone straight into the division series against the Cardinals.
The 5-game series against the Cardinals.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like I said, I think they threw them a bone because baseball is just like not gonna ever have revenue sharing. So I think this is just kind of their way of like, okay, you don't have to be, as good to always make the playoffs. You can have a little bit of a lesser record.
I think it was for the fans too, because it's hard to. Baseball's such a long season. You mentioned like football training camp. Baseball's such a long season. You have so many teams out of it by August.
Yeah.
And so when you have a second wild card, now if you're floating around that 500 area, you're actually still in it until the end of September. And so if you're one of those teams and one of those fan bases, you're still coming to the games, you're still tuning in. Whereas when you had one wild card, there were years, like you said, especially like Red Sox, Yankees, when those two teams were battling it out.
Toronto and Baltimore, it didn't even matter.
Or even take the second place team in the other divisions, like a Cleveland, Minnesota, whatever. If the Yankees were the best team in the league and the Red Sox were the second best team, then the Red Sox had that wild card locked up, and then everybody else that was even remotely close, it didn't matter. So I think it was also for that reason. But like you said, it creates this weird kind of one game. And for baseball, man, you play 162 games.
And it comes down to one game.
And you have a one-game playoff. So it's really unique. And that's a scenario that it created that season. And the Pirates get to host it against the Reds.
And it's kind of weird because baseball, everything in baseball is set up like for a series. Like baseball isn't like basketball or even football where it's like winner take all one game. Like, college basketball, it's just one and done in these tournaments. But like baseball is always geared to a 5 game, a 7 game. Even back, the first World Series was a 9-game World Series. So, I mean, it's always seems to be they like to add more games. And like you said, they went to 162 games. I mean, the season goes, if you consider spring training, it goes from February to November now. I mean, that's a long season. Yeah. I mean, you're talking like NASCAR territory here. I mean, it's basically that. So they swept the Reds in Cincinnati to earn their home wild card playoff game. So what was happening in Pittsburgh now is these last 2 years we've collapsed. It's been 20 years, and people are just like, oh my goodness, we get to be excited and proud of the Pirates. Yeah. And this is kind of like 2013, so it's after the Steelers have won 2 Super Bowls, the Penguins have won a Stanley Cup. So like everybody's like,
about time.
Yeah, it's about time the Pirates do something besides, it's a nice distraction in May and June until the All-Star break.
There was so much excitement for that one game. I don't know that there's ever been that much excitement for one baseball game in this town.
I've never seen anything like it besides the Colts playoff game in 2005. That's the only thing I can compare, and that wasn't even here. I just remember people going nuts for that, or the Super Bowls.
But even leading
maybe that game, what was it? The game 5 or 6.
Well, one of our
the Stanley Cup game where they had a chance to clinch. That's probably he's close.
In terms of games played in Pittsburgh,
people were going insane that night too.
That might be comparable when they had a chance to clinch the Stanley Cup.
It would have been the only championship in Pittsburgh since Mazeroski.
Yeah, so it might have been. And certainly, I wasn't alive for the Mazeroski game, but in terms of games played in Pittsburgh, baseball specifically. The 2 70s World Series
were both won in Baltimore.
Were both won in Baltimore. So, in terms of anticipation, I don't know that there was a more anticipated night than that. And it came off of those 20 years of losing. And PNC Park, one of the things that happened during that 20-year losing streak was the city got strong-armed into building new stadiums. People can certainly debate whether it was the right thing to do and using the certain tax money that they used, et cetera. The one thing that you really can't debate is it definitely created all kinds of business and excitement on the north side, on the North Shore.
Well, it made the Pirates, stay here. I mean,
it saved the team for better or worse. It saved the baseball team.
Nobody remembers that Sophie Maslow had that idea 10 years earlier.
She did, and everybody
Roberto
laughed.
Clemente Park, and I remember everybody laughed.
Everybody laughed at her. Why would
10 years later, you're building the PNC Park?
Why would you build a football stadium that's only for football? That's ridiculous. And certainly that's what. And every other city was doing it. So if you didn't build a new stadium, some other city would have.
Camden Yards. Once somebody built Camden Yards in Baltimore, that kind of changed the whole, like, because everybody was in those multi-purpose stadiums,
Right.
and they kind of went to PNC.
Well, Three Rivers was just an awful stadium for baseball.
Baseball, yeah, it was pretty bad.
That was
Even
terrible.
football, I remember
yeah.
it was hard to see that end zone.
It wasn't good for football either, but at least it was sort of built a little bit
Yeah.
for football. But yeah, baseball, it was just not a baseball stadium. And like you said, everybody was building these kind of old-fashioned baseball parks.
Well, yeah, it started with Baltimore, and then I think PNC Park ushered in a new one because it seemed like a lot of cities copied off of that view of the city.
Yes, that
became
skyline.
iconic. And like you see almost every
San Francisco did the same thing
Yeah.
after PNC Park. Yeah.
but every other city seems to do that now.
PNC Park at the time was hailed as the single most beautiful ballpark in Major
and
League
it is.
Baseball.
It's a nice place to watch baseball. It's
It-
too bad
it
the
is.
baseball that's played there stinks.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. So they had this beautiful ballpark. My day job when I'm not podcasting here is I work over on the North Shore, and I've worked over there for the last 21 years. And I worked over there when Three River Stadium was still there, and that was just an area that there was nothing. I mean, when you'd go to a game, there was no restaurants, there wasn't a lot of even people like me, offices, people that worked over there. And now it's vibrant. There's hotels. There's, and none of that stuff existed.
Yeah, you go there on a
Back then.
game day. There's like you said, there's restaurants, there's people eating and stuff.
Right.
Even not on a non-game day,
Yes.
people still there.
Yeah, so it definitely, a lot of times when politicians promise things, they don't really amount to much. This time, I think, it definitely made that area vibrant again. People loved the park. It was nationally renowned. However, up until that point, all the baseball, like you said, played in there
Yeah.
was terrible.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, even to this day, I'll see people walking around with Cubs jerseys or
Yeah, it's a
whatever
lot of
teams in
opposing,
town. There's
yeah.
a lot of people that will make the trip because it's this beautiful ballpark. But there wasn't a lot for local fans to really root for.
Well, yeah, and it was so big. I remember Andrew McCutcheon, and I think there's more of a tradition at Penn State is they do that. They wear all white at their games. So he did a blackout. They had everybody. They gave out. I don't know if they gave out shirts, but they everybody wore black pirate shirts. So the whole crowd's like dressed in black. And a great thing was so now you got to bring out the Pittsburgh celebrities. Michael Keaton's in the stands. There's this guy, Bill Coyne, who's like a 90-year-old usher. I think he finally retired like a couple years ago. But he was working the game, and he had been there when Mazeroski had hit the home run in Game 7 of 1960. So there was just like Pittsburgh was ready to go. There's people on the bridge that's standing room only. The crowd is going absolutely crazy an hour before first pitch. Which brings us to poor Johnny Cueto, Johnny Cueto is actually a really good pitcher.
Right.
I mean, as much as we like to laugh at him here, it's Johnny Cueto had a career ERA of 1.90 at PNC Park. Pretty good. And he was really good against the Pirates. So Dusty Baker was not like just losing his mind throwing him out there. He had a pretty good pitcher, but the problem was Cueto had been hurt that season. Okay. And he hadn't been as good in the last months because he had been hurt. I think he'd hurt his back or something.
Well, the thing that one game playoff created was this like pitching was the most important thing. It still is.
Yeah, because in baseball, yeah.
So you try to get. So you mentioned that series to end the season.
Well, they didn't pitch. I doubt they pitched Cueto.
Right. They were. Hurdle and Baker were both positioning their team so that they would have their ace go into that one game, because if the whole season's on the line for one game, you've got to have your best pitcher pitch in that game, and Cueto was their best pitcher. And like you said, he was a great pitcher and would have a lot of success after this. So that was the guy you wanted on the mound if you're a Reds fan.
And Liriano had a great season too, although they had Garrett Cole, who had a pretty good year too.
Yeah, Garrett Cole was still young at that point, but you're right.
And they had some guy named Charlie Morton ground, but Charlie Morton wasn't Charlie Morton back then.
No,
he was ground chuck back then.
Yeah, but he was, and then they had A.J. Burnett. The pitching coach was a guy named Ray Searage, and he was like a magician because he would take these guys like Burnett and Liriano who, had maybe had some success in the past, and they would just totally revive their careers in Pittsburgh. Liriano was 16-8 that season, which was unheard of for a Pirates pitcher to win that many games. So you're right. Liriano was definitely the guy for that game, and just like Cueto was their guy.
Yeah, so it brings us to the first inning. They kind of cruise through. Both, not much happens. I think it's 3 up, 3 down for both teams. And then it gets to the second, and that's where things get interesting in the Pirates batting, is Marlon Byrd. It's his first at bat in the postseason. Marlon Byrd had played for like 8 or 10 years prior to that and not had any sniff of the postseason, but he was a pretty good player, and the Pirates had signed him, actually traded for him late in the season, and they knew they wouldn't be able to sign him after. He was just one of those rental players, and a very un-Pirate thing to do, but they knew they needed another bat. And sure enough, to Neil Huntington and whoever else pulled that off, their credit, his first at bat, he hits a home run off Johnny Cueto. Okay, it's only 1-run home run. It's only 1-0. So the next batter is Russell Martin. So at that point, if you watch, I remember watching on TV, you could hear like a smattering of like in hockey they'll do it, like the Flyers fans will do it, the Flurry, and now they do Murray, they'll do that. Normally, you make a couple say it goes away or the fans get bored and do something else.
Right.
And that's what was kind of going on in PNC Park in this second inning, was the fans were kind of trying to get a Cueto chance, but you kind of hear in the background it really wasn't anything at that point. And if Cueto just keeps himself together and ignores it, it's only 1 run, right?
Yes.
It probably goes away. People stop doing it. It's like the kid in grade school. You ignore it, he's going to stop calling. He's going to find someone else to pick on, something better to do.
Right.
Well, unfortunately for Johnny Cueto, as he walked back to the mound, he got distracted by the cheering and dropped the ball.
Yeah.
And that's what basically changed the game in the Pirates' favor. Because at that point, now the fans go absolutely ballistic. I mean, nobody's sitting anyway. And now they're like 40,000 people on the bridge, everything are yelling Cueto, Cueto. So he's so distracted that his next pitch, I could have thrown that pitch. He grooves it down the middle of the plate, and Russell Martin puts it into like the 5th row. And at that point, I think, even though it's only 2-0, I think the Reds were done. Put a fork in them, they're done. Because the next batter is Lariano, an American League pitcher, and Cueto gives up a single to Lariano and is like, I'm sure career whatever batting average under 0 he has. And I mean, the only thing that saved him was Frazier, the third baseman, made like a highlight reel catch to end this inning at 2-0. But I think at that point the damage had been done. Cueto was pretty much shaken. And I mean, I can't remember in professional sports like ever seeing a professional player, especially like somebody that's pretty good and has been in these situations before, get rattled like that. I can't think of anything else like it.
No, it was such a unique moment in sports, period. Not just Pittsburgh sports period, because
the announcers on TBS normally they don't mention stuff like that.
Yeah. And everybody.
And it was Cal Ripken and
Ron Darling.
Ron Darling, yeah.
They even said, this is getting inside Cueto's head. I've been to a lot of sporting events, and as a fan, you like to think that you have some kind of impact on the game, right? And maybe you do. I think the energy and the momentum and all that. But like taunting one player or booing one player, that doesn't do it. In fact, a lot of times it backfires.
Yeah, seems to fire him up.
Yeah, like that. Like when the Flyers fans boo Sidney Crosby every time he touches a puck, he would just go torch them. and that's the kind of thing that it normally does. These are professional athletes. They're making millions of dollars a year. They're not going to get rattled by somebody chanting their name.
They've been doing this since they were like 16, 15, since they were in grade school.
And if this was a high school game or maybe even a college game, maybe that stuff works. But at the professional level, you never saw anybody get rattled. And for him to walk onto the mound and just drop the baseball, I mean, that's not even something
if he just would have stood there and just composed himself and not dropped the ball, I think, it would have not have been as bad. And then the groove that pitch. I mean, you watch that pitch. Oh my goodness, he put it right down the middle of the plate.
Well, you could see he was rattled when he dropped the ball. So I don't know that I've ever seen a pitcher do that, even when people aren't chanting their names.
Yeah.
To just be holding the ball and to just fumble it and around and drop it on the ground, and he like ran over and picked it up real quick, like maybe nobody will notice. And like you said, the crowd just went, and like you said, people were already Cueto, and when that happened, everybody just went into an absolute frenzy. And it's almost like he wanted to just get that next pitch over the plate as fast as he could to shut everybody up. and he rushed it, and then Martin drilled it over the left field fence, and that was it. I mean, the crowd was just it was 20 years
yeah, people
of
just
frustration.
of Johnny Cueto receiving 20 years.
At that moment, just screaming and saying, I sat through this for 20 years, and it was a great moment, and it was a unique moment. And you're right, Steve. I can't believe it happened, because you just never see anything like it. You really don't. And that chant, I think that might have started with Darryl Strawberry in the 80s.
Yeah.
People used to chant Darryl,
yeah.
And so, just whatever name, you just chant their name. But like you said, it never has the impact that it had that night.
Yeah, and then, like I say, he gave up that single, and they got out of that inning, but then I think he gave up a couple more runs the next inning, and the Reds were pretty much done because Liriano, he's probably the biggest unsung. I mean, everybody remembers Cueto and the home runs, but Liriano really is the hero of that game. He goes 7 innings and only gives up 1 run. And the Pirates had a pretty decent bullpen. Gurley wasn't bad, but they still had, in their bullpen, they still had Melanson, and probably Morton was probably available. And, right. I mean, they had some guys in the bullpen that are pretty good. So, I mean, he goes 7 innings, 1 run. Jason Grilli comes in and closes out the game in the 9th. The fans go crazy. I mean, there's fireworks going off. People are jumping in the water. I mean, Russell Martin with that home run. Marlon Byrd, the rental player, 2 for 4, 2 RBIs. Liriano, 7 innings. That's kind of your heroes of the game. It wasn't even Walker or McCutchen who were really the nucleus of the team. It was the role players that really drove that game.
Yeah, Russell Martin had a flair for the dramatic that year. He actually had a bunch of walk-off hits or plays where he walked off a game. And so he did kind of, that whole year, he kind of had that flair for the dramatic, and that was certainly the most dramatic moment of that season. And probably
he was a really good catcher, too. He's more of a defensive catcher than a offensive power, really. He wasn't Johnny Bench back there, but he could throw people out, and he was pretty good at catching the ball. And Marlon Byrd, like I said, had a pretty good game. So after that, they win, and now they got to go, like you said, they got to go play the division series. Now, you don't even go to the championship series. You go to the division series, which is a 5-game series, a short series. And what happened was they would lose to St. Louis. And Garrett Cole had a pretty good, if I remember, series, but nobody else. They never were able to really get into like a 7-game where they could. I think the Pirates, like we said, their strength was probably more deep pitching. The Cardinals had Waka, and I remember they just couldn't hit Waka that one game. And
the Cardinals were a powerhouse. I mean, they were,
and they had Pujols, who always was a Pirate killer. And
that series went 5 games. So credit to the Pirates for taking it the full 5 games. I believe Cole started Game 5 and lost, but they were actually up 2 games to 1 after 3 games, and Game 4 was at PNC Park.
And that was with Waka, wasn't it?
It may have been, but they had a chance. McCutchen was up in the bottom of the 9th in that game. They were down by a run, but there was a guy on base.
Oh, geez.
And that was the last at bat, and he almost caught one. I mean, that would have been a dramatic way to end that series, but he actually, I think he flied out, and then they lost Game 5. So it was a pretty good run, but they just weren't quite as good as St. Louis, and it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, and the St. Louis went to the World Series and lost to the Red Sox. So I mean, St. Louis wasn't. I mean, they were good, but they're always like St. Louis is like the Steelers of baseball. They're always like really good, and I can see why people like I never understood why people hate the Steelers. Now I can see why, because it's like the Pirates have like one good year out of like 20, and the Cardinals are just like good every year, just come along and like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of got that going for you. Inevitably, the Pirates, as sports always happens, they lose their core players. Liriano, Neil Walker, Andrew McCutchen. Liriano, probably his performance started to slip. Neil Walker and Andrew McCutchen both left via free agency. The Pirates, once the certain amount of years wore off, they don't pay for high-priced free agents like the Mets. I think Mets and where McCutchen go, the Giants. So I mean, they just don't. That's not how they do it. I mean, I don't know if they could or they couldn't. That's That's on Bob Nutting and his money. How much money do you want to spend? I mean, I'm not going to tell somebody how to run their business, and I don't know the numbers, but I can understand why, maybe you wouldn't want to pay all that money.
I would tell somebody how to run their business if I'm a paying customer.
Yeah.
And you're right. The baseball economics are unfair to the small market teams for sure, but there are other small market teams that manage to make it work. And really the big difference is you can't miss on guys. The Yankees can pay a guy millions of dollars and he stinks and it's no big deal. If you're the Pirates or the A's or the Kansas City Royals, you can't do that. But there's plenty of other teams that found ways to be at least competitive over a long period of time. And the Pirates never wanted to invest anything. They're at this moment in time have the lowest payroll in baseball. Nutting is cheap. Kudos to him for spending some money during this era they made the deadline deals, but that was all kind of a temporary thing, unfortunately. And like you said, whenever guys started going away, they never bothered to spend the money to fill any of those holes. Their front office wasn't apt enough to draft players or develop players in the minor leagues.
In 2013, they closed that loophole, that drafting over, paying over slot for the draft. Like there's a big penalty or something, and before you just had to kind of like make up a reason of why you were doing it, and like baseball kind of like wink, wink, nod, nod. But like I guess the union got sick of it, and the Yankees got sick of it, and that's kind of what's going on in baseball is the union wants a high salary for the few members like Garrett Cole that are going to sign like he just did with the Yankees, millions of dollars.
Yeah. And
the Yankees want to be able to do that to keep themselves competitive, and they don't really care, if the small market teams do. Pedro Alvarez, and that's that once again, it goes back to the two most expensive things in baseball are pitching and power hitting. And, Pedro Alvarez absolutely just stunk it up. He couldn't hit. He struck out way too much. And then he couldn't field a position, which in the National League, if you can't field a position, you're not going to work out.
He might have been the worst. They kept trying him at different positions.
They tried him at first base, third base.
Yeah. He was just awful. But when he was
when
he was hitting 30+ home runs in 2013, you could afford to have a bad position player. But like you said, when the power kind of flamed out, you couldn't do that. They did have. I mean, they also made that wild card game in 14 and 15 too.
They did have other chances at it, and they ran into Arrieta, which that's another ironic. Like Arrieta, every game but that one, they smoked Arrieta. They literally knocked the cover off the ball. In the one game you need to do it, it's kind of the opposite of Johnny Cueto. Like Johnny Cueto had owned the Pirates up to that point, and then they get him this time, but. Then in Bumgarner in the other game.
Yeah, it was
another Garrett Cole moment.
Yeah, Madison Bumgarner and Jake Arrieta were the two pitchers in 14 and 15 respectively. And so that was just the down. 15 especially was just like a dream season. They won 98 games that year, and they had that great series against the Cardinals, but they still didn't win the division. They still had to play that one game, and because they faced those two pitchers who were just on fire at the time, both of them.
Well, Bumgarner's always been good. Arrieta, I think.
Yeah, but
I think that's better living through chemistry because you just don't all of a sudden like he was a mediocre pitcher and then all of a sudden, oh look at me, I'm really good
regardless,
for 1 year.
But that 1 year and especially that October, I mean he was.
But even before that, during that year, the Pirates, everybody he had never done well against the Pirates. Like I remember going into that game like because I think the Cubs had traded for him or something or. Whoever he played for, the Pirates had played him earlier.
I think he was with Atlanta before that.
Yeah, but the Pirates are like, oh, yeah, we hung 8 right runs on him like earlier in the year. And it was like, oh, well, we should be able to hit this guy. I was like, no.
So they never made it as far as they did in 13.
No, yeah, they never could replicate. And both those games were at home, too, which was.
All 3 of those games were at home, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then after Pedro Alvarez flamed out, some guys named Charlie Morton and Garrett Cole. You were talking about Ray Searage, and I think. Chuck Tanner, the old Pirates quote, manager had a great, pitching coach, he helps 4 pitchers, hurts 4 pitchers, and then doesn't really make a difference with the other 4. And I think that's kind of like, there seems to be some truth to that. Because for every A.J. Burnett and, who else, Lariano, he helped, there was Charlie Morton and Garrett Cole, which, I mean, how do you screw those guys up? I mean, especially Garrett Cole. Like, Morton, I could see maybe, like, he's always been kind of mediocre, but he's just had a couple clutch game sevens. Garrett Cole is, like, legit.
Right.
That's an ace. I mean, I don't, and they always blame, because they wanted him to pitch to contact, is just let him hit the ball, you play defense, whereas Garrett Cole likes to strike people out and throw hard, and I guess the philosophy was, well, you would burn yourself out too quick, and you'd have to bring in the bullpen earlier, whereas if you just pitch to contact, you can get through deeper into the game.
Right.
But I guess when Garrett Cole's throwing, 98 to 100 miles an hour, it doesn't matter. He can't hit it anyway.
Well, and Garrett Cole, when he first went to the Astros, I mean, he talked about it was like night and day in terms of, the analytics that Houston had, and the things that they identified in his game, and the things that they had him doing that no one in Pittsburgh had ever done, and you can certainly see the results of that.
Yeah.
And that's why he's one of the richest men in America today, because Houston transformed him into this great pitcher.
That and having Scott Boras for an agent helps. Yeah.
Right.
But also what I think was disappointing was the Pirates weren't the only team to be doing this drafting. Was teams like Kansas City had kind of adopted the same philosophy, and they ended up going to the World Series in back-to-back years, winning one of those years. And Kansas City's hardly a large market. And also the Cubs, who are perennial losers, ineptitude, they finally broke their streak in 2016. Now, the Cubs aren't a small market team by any stretch of the imagination. They spend a lot of money, but they were able to rebuild and at least, see one World Series. It's just a shame that the Pirates couldn't at least see one World Series,
right.
Or at least
or even one playoff series win, because they still have not won a playoff series since '79.
Yeah. And then also Johnny Cueto went on to pitch Game 2 of the 2015 World Series for Kansas City Royals, and he pitched a complete game, which is rare, and only gave up one run to the Mets. And I guess there was nobody there to yell Cueto at him in Kansas City, so it worked out. Yeah. Not pitching on the road. Maybe whoever, Ned Yost or whoever run the Royals at that time, figured we're not going to let him pitch on the road where he can get heckled.
I think as great as this game was, this Johnny Cueto game, and as much as I think every Pittsburgh sports fan, even at that point, I had sort of given up on the Pirates. I was certainly not as big of a fan as I had been, but I think everybody in the whole town was, again, fired up for that game, and I think everybody will remember that as a great moment. So as great as that moment was, and as memorable as it was, I think there's a lot of sadness to it too, because it just also makes you remember how things quickly fell apart after the next two seasons, and how now we're right back at this point again where the team stinks. We won't spend any money. We have a cheap owner. We have a nice stadium.
But I think baseball sticks it to the Pirates. They really do. I mean, remember when the Cubs, that was the one year they had the guy from Korea, the power hitter from Korea, and he was playing second base. And the guy from the Cubs slides like 15 feet into the grass to take him out, and he's one of their best hitters.
Yeah.
And everybody, that whole line in the media, oh, that's baseball, oh, that's baseball, oh, isn't Joe Madden a genius? He took out their best player. And then the Cubs do the exact same thing to the Mets shortstop, and all of a sudden it's a problem. Fair. I think it's just been a lot of that in baseball. It's like, oh, you found a loophole that sticks it to the big market teams. Oh, well, we got to close that loophole.
Sure. Again, the Pirates are up against it. I'm not arguing that. It is way harder for them to succeed than it is for a bunch of the other teams. But to your point, Kansas City Kansas City figured out a way. A bunch of other teams figured out a way.
Tampa Bay seems to be competitive every couple of years.
Milwaukee's another team that fields pretty good teams. And Pittsburgh, it's an owner that wants to run a team to make as much money as possible and, get as many people as possible, because a lot of people go to Pirate games just to go. That's the one thing that baseball has in its favor. It's the one sport where you can just go on a summer night to just enjoy yourself, and you don't really care as much about the team winning and losing. You never go to an NFL game saying, I just want to, have eat some nice food and enjoy the weather. You just wouldn't do that with other sports, but you can do that with baseball. So that works in his favor. It's hard. I loved, when I was a kid, I loved baseball. It was my favorite sport. And that 20-year losing streak, when that ended, I thought, okay, I can give baseball a little piece of my heart back. And I just felt like it evaporated so quickly after that great night. And I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get back to that. So like I said, it's a great moment, but I think there's also, for at least me, there's some sadness there of, to your point, what could have been.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, well, they didn't maximize it. But I can't even say that because looking back that year, they went out and they got Marlon Byrd. It wasn't like they ran into a pretty good Cardinals team that was a little more experienced in the playoffs than they were. And then the next 2 years, I mean, they just needed, during the regular season, they just needed to win the division, and they just never, for whatever reason, could pull it off.
They were unfortunate to be playing in such a tough division at that time because, like you said, years before that, it was not a good division.
No.
But at that time, it was a really strong, really powerful division, so that worked against them. And so, yeah, they certainly missed their opportunities. That 13 team, McCutchen was the MVP. I mean, we don't really talk much about Kutch. He's probably their only five-tool player since Bonds. I mean, I can't think of anybody else that even comes close to being a five-tool player. And
he was really good. He was a really good hitter too. It's just a shame, like people always criticize Barry Bonds like that, but like when you're in a short series, even a 7-game series, it's sometimes they pitch around the star players, or you only get so many at bats.
Yeah, and so then,
in a 7-game series, how many at bats are you going to get? Maybe 20.
Well,
and
so that's where you have, like you said, guys like Marlon Byrd and Russell Martin and players like that step up. They had some. It wasn't the whole team. To your point, not like a couple years earlier where the whole team revolved around Kutch. There were other players, and Neil Walker. That was another guy that he grew up in Pittsburgh. He was Pine Richland kid.
Yeah.
He grew up in that losing streak, and for him to be on that team and on the field that night, I think that was kind of special too. And again, just sad, missed opportunity because and that was really the only, they had that short window, and because of the way the team is run, that was the window, and like you said, just running up against teams and pitchers that they couldn't beat. That was it. And that was the end. And we might never see them get that close.
Well, that's still
for a
the best.
time.
I would say that's the best Pirate moment in PNC Park.
Oh, yeah.
By far. I mean,
I don't even know. I wouldn't even know what to tell you for a second place choice.
in
I really
PNC
wouldn't.
Park,
Yeah.
I don't know. Didn't they come back like down 5 runs once against somebody? Like
Sure.
Houston, yeah. Brian Giles hit like a grand slam or something.
Yeah, great. The Brian Giles era.
Yeah.
Whippy.
Yeah.
What a great era that was.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, outside of like the Game 7 of the World Series in '79, I can't really think of another. You said we were talking to another podcast about Game 5 in Atlanta, but that was in Atlanta.
Right. I mean, if you want to talk about great moments, really, take it beyond PNC Park. Take it all the way back to '79. That's got to be a top 5 Pittsburgh's Pirates moment.
Yeah, I mean, Stargell hitting that home run in the 7th inning, take the lead off of whoever the pitcher was for the Orioles.
But from that moment until now, there's not a lot. There
really isn't.
The
It's
teams
a shame.
of the early '90s.
It's a shame because you compare that to like the Steelers or even some of the Pitt stuff. I mean, it's just
right.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot of moments, and Pittsburgh sports history. It's the reason we're doing this podcast because there's just so many great moments, and that was really kind of it in recent history for the Pirates. But all that being said, it was a pretty special moment and a pretty cool memory.
Yeah, so I mean, the great Pirate moment, people jumping off the bridges, going crazy. It was a good moment. I think the Pirate fans, like, it's rare, like you said, the fans could actually will a team. Like, you think, oh, you're crazy when you think that. But, boy, if you watch that game, you can't come away without too many other conclusions. I mean, that the Pirate fans really had a hand in, getting in Johnny Cueto's head. And it's just a shame that it ended so suddenly and it didn't they never capitalized on it. Like, it just wish you could have capitalized with a championship or a little bit more than just a one-game wild card win.
Yeah, very, very, like I said, very unique moment. I honestly can't think of anything even comparable where fans rattled a professional athlete the way that the Pirate fans rattled Johnny Cueto that night.
Well, all right. Well, thanks for tuning in. That'll be it for this podcast. Hopefully the Pirates provide us with some more memories in the future that we can have a
I'm not
better.
holding my breath.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Please check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Pittsburgh Sports Memories. Please leave us a rating, and we'll catch you next time.